anyone who sees there's like another way, I think at first gets a little ridicule. I think a lot of my peers were like, what are you doing? Like,
Yeah.
that's interesting. Like, you have a successful restaurant. We really like to come in and eat this duck dinner that you do, and you're going to cook vegetables now. Like,
Yeah.
even my wife was like, what are you doing?
Yeah. Hey, folks, thanks for tuning in to the latest episode of the Ecosystem Member Podcast. Today is a special one, not just because of our amazing guest, but also because it is our 50th episode of the Ecosystem Member Podcast. There were multiple points of inspiration for the podcast from writers, including Terry Tempest Williams and Robin Wall Kimmerer, to thinkers such as Arnie Nace and Gary Snyder. I was frustrated coming off of leaving a job because of my refusal to help greenwash the extractive industry. I knew I couldn't be the only one who felt that there was more to our human relationship with nature and the more than human world than just drilling and mining and taking from the earth. So thanks to everyone who's joined the podcast over the last few years. In particular, Susan Murphy, whose episode about the intersection of Buddhism, Zen, and climate change is our most listened to episode, followed closely by our episode with climber Zoe Hart, who talked about her video series, Parenting Disaster Style. If you haven't checked these out, both are video episodes, so head to YouTube or Spotify to watch. And lest I forget, a special shout out to Patagonia's director of philosophy, Vincent Stanley, who was the first ever guest on our very first episode and was honestly way too high profile of a guest to take time to be on an unknown brand new podcast. But he did, and it speaks to the generosity and genuine nature of his spirit. For today's episode, our guest is chef partner of the restaurant Oyster Oyster in Washington, D.C., Rob Rubba. Not only does Oyster Oyster have a Michelin Green Star and a Michelin Star, Rob was named Outstanding Chef in 2023 for his work at Oyster Oyster by the James Beard Foundation. The restaurant's core menu is vegetarian with an optional oyster course, the name being a play on oyster mushrooms and the oyster shellfish, both of which have pretty sterling environmental records, as we talk a little bit about in the episode. We also talk about Rob's connection to nature, the role of creativity in creating a sustainable kitchen, and our mutual admiration for the now shuttered silo in London, created by the brilliant Douglas McMaster. After this episode, we have one more episode in our food collection of episodes with Pablo Usobiaga, creator of Arcatierra and Baldio in Mexico, a project he worked on with Douglas McMaster as well. So make sure you're subscribed to get that episode as soon as it drops. And if you're enjoying the podcast, please leave us a positive review on your favorite podcast platform or give this video a thumbs up if you're watching on YouTube. As I've said before, it helps people find the podcast. Without further delay, here's the latest episode of the Ecosystem Member Podcast with Chef Rob Rubba. Today on the Ecosystem Member Podcast, I am really excited to be joined by Rob Rubba, chef and partner at Oyster Oyster in Washington, D.C. Thanks for joining us, Rob.
Yeah, happy to be here.
So we always ask our guests the same first question. As a person, as a chef, in your case, how do you think about your relationship with nature?
Well, it's a good one. My relationship with nature, I think, goes back to my childhood, honestly. Like, I grew up in a town in between the Bay and the Pinelands in New Jersey. So I was either in the Bay, on the beach, or in the forest all the time as a kid. Very connected to that. I just like being out under the sun. And then, activities outside, everything along the lines of that. And then just kind of as I grew up and became a chef, just the attachment to farms and wilderness and everything. It's just very much a part of who I am and as a person and what I like to do with my time off. So yeah, I think it's odd if you don't have a relationship with nature.
Yeah. I mean, I probably wouldn't be inviting you on if it wasn't clear you had some sort of relationship with nature, but everybody views it differently. So
Yeah.
One of the ways I guess you apply that, I was watching an interview you did with CBS Mornings, and they suggested you might have what they termed an overzealous approach to sustainability with your restaurant, Oyster Oyster. So maybe with that frame, what was the origin story, or what is the origin story of Oyster Oyster, and sort of what were you hoping to accomplish with this overzealous approach to sustainability?
Yeah, overzealous. Yeah, I'd been cooking for about 16 years when I started thinking about Oyster Oyster. I'd always had a connection to like being more environmentally sound with my work. But I was getting to a point with books I was reading and articles that like the system I was working in wasn't good for the future. It wasn't good for our environment, wasn't good for us as humans and other life on this planet. To the point where I didn't even think I wanted to run a restaurant anymore, to be honest. And then sustainability, as loose of a word that is, was kind of going around. I started thinking about how could I apply that to a restaurant and build a place from ground up. So I left the restaurant I was working at and set out to open what would be Oyster Oyster with a business partner and create a place that was thinking about the future and creative ways to build a better restaurant. So throwing away all these things I thought I knew were the correct way to do for 16 years and reinventing kind of how I was going to approach cooking and running a restaurant. And the whole purpose is that from the ground up to just do things better every day. We say 1% better every day. We know we're not going to be perfect from the start. And it's just a continuing thing that we're just trying to improve.
And for those unfamiliar with oysters, the shellfish, versus oysters, the oyster mushroom, like, can you tell us why it makes sense for pretty much a vegetarian restaurant to have oysters, the shellfish, on your menu?
Yeah. The whole point is for us to be a responsible restaurant, and we're located in the Chesapeake, uh, one of the largest places of oyster production, and a beautiful place of that for a long time is like exploited completely. And to not think about that when we're talking about being environmentally friendly would be kind of messed up. So oysters became a big part of that. It's not a huge representation on our menu. It's not like every course has oysters or anything, but we want to contribute back to that, to the Chesapeake. The fact there always is one oyster can filter up to 50 gallons of water a day. So you imagine these beautiful reefs being rebuilt and how pristine the waterways would be, and then all the symbiotic relationships that would happen there. So we talk about soil and regenerative soil and everything. We want to talk about regenerative waterways too. And oysters are a really great example of a product for that.
Yeah, it's fantastic. I'm not sure everyone knows that stat you mentioned on the oysters. It's actually one of the things where if we grow and consume more of them, we should end up with cleaner waters, which is
Exactly.
kind of amazing. I don't know of any other food, maybe like fungi with remediation of soil and things like that, but I'm not sure there's too many foodstuffs that actually accomplish sort of a net positive effect on the environment.
Exactly. Well put. There you go.
So, one thing that I ask a lot of chefs, especially this season on the podcast, I know you were on a panel with Ben Shuri from Attica in Melbourne recently, and I was talking to an entrepreneur who created this system, Arcatira and Baldeo in Mexico City, where they're bringing back the chinampas, sort of floating artificial gardens, and then connecting that with the food in the restaurant. And I think one of the things that, as you know, an eater, I'm not a chef by any stretch of the imagination, but someone who also cares about these things, is like, we think about the leverage point in the system when we're thinking about trying to get people to eat more sustainably. How do you think about your role in that? Like, do you think it's like creating something, seeing the dishes at Oyster Oyster, beautiful dishes that look like they taste delicious? Or is it more about like farmers producing certain things, or is it more about eaters coming in and saying like, I need you, whatever restaurant, to actually change the menu to be more environmentally responsible? Like, do you think it's a combination of all three? Is there a specific leverage point that you think needs to more of?
I would say it's the combination. It definitely is. I think when we built this restaurant, it was like we want to be a great place of hospitality, fantastic technique, great quality. Because if we fail there, then we kind of fail on the mission, right? We're not going to change minds. And then it's also that connection with all of our farmers. It's like, oh, you could grow local food, but you could do it really poorly, right? Doesn't mean it's going to be really great systems that you're using. So we want to work with responsible people who are looking to regenerative or no-tilling and growing really great varietals of crops that are resistant to some of the effects we're seeing with the climate too. And then at the same time, the guests that come in, we are a place that's going to hopefully show them better ways to do things and not be preachy or didactic about the way we do things, but do it in a really fun and like holistic way. And I think that's what restaurants are. They're great places of hospitality and fun. And it kind of takes away the doom and gloom of these issues sometimes, where you can have a moment of bliss and enjoyment and celebrate something and be contributing to making the world a better place. So I think it's a really helpful tool for that mission.
And what do you think, as from your perspective as a chef and running a restaurant, when people come into Oyster Oyster, what misperceptions do they have about sort of environmentally responsible eating? What is their reaction when they see the menu that's vegetables and driven by working with these local ingredients? Like, how do they respond? Do they have any misperceptions about what it should look like, what environmentally responsible eating should look like?
Yeah, To me, I don't think it looks that different, right? There's a lot of things that you take away. And I think when you start having those conversations about omitting things, folks will think they're coming into something that's very rationed, right? Like it's
Hmm.
so taken away that it's not going to have opulence and feel great and all that kind of thing. And I think that's a misconception. It's going to be very minimal, right? And
Hmm.
that you can have abundance responsibly. And I think that's a beautiful part of it, that you can leave satiated and feeling good, and that it's not just this complete minimalist thing and we're taking things away and we're just eating like seaweed broth and like a tiny little piece of fish or something. I think that's a misconception and something that people don't really understand sometimes. But once they get in there, we offer such a friendly environment. I think it takes away any fear or worry or misconception of what's going to happen.
Yeah, I often think of when I lived in New York, like the anticipation of ramp season, or in London, the Jersey Royal potatoes when they would sort of hit the grocery store shelves. And I feel like there's maybe it'd be interesting to get your perspective on this from a chef and a restaurateur. When we think about like seasonal eating, like these feel like we could create sort of celebratory moments around these like rare, unique, only once in a year type ingredients.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we're talking right now during like a holiday season and all these traditions that are associated with it. We're so like unattached to why these ingredients are at that time and place. And it's the same thing with seasonality. I think we want to celebrate that. In our restaurant, with being so hyper seasonal, it is an amazing thing. Like for my cooks, we're looking at root vegetables and pickled things that we've done all through the winter. And when those first ramps pop up, we all run out and go foraging together to
Yeah.
do it because it's like so exciting, like something green and vibrant and fresh. And you feel connected the way like ancestors must have felt when that came up and why it's such a prized thing to have and enjoy. And I think with a restaurant like we're doing, we really want to celebrate those ingredients. And I think that if you're someone who visits us throughout the seasons, you start to feel that connection like you talked about. Like, wow, this is ramp season. This is important now. Or this is when this potato or this like peach, like I want to serve the best quality peach I can when it's at its ripeness. I don't want to buy peaches from somewhere else that got shipped unripe, and it's just when you taste that difference, I think it changes your mind and your perspective of what seasonality is. And it's just really putting the best foot forward when you're doing that. And that comes to your sourcing and your purveyors and the farmers you work with. And that takes a lot of work, but I think we can change how people perceive those seasons for sure.
And you mentioned, you did some reading and found some people that sort of inspired you. It just brought to mind when you mentioned the peaches. I was thinking about Alice Waters and her focus on ingredients. Like, who was in your library? What you were reading when you started to differently about how to run a restaurant?
Yeah, that's great. Alice Waters always like that's great. You bring it up. My uncle is like one of the biggest mentors. Is like obsessed with Alice Waters through his career, so he always had the books, and I always thought they were fun because you had to read them. They weren't like cookbooks now that
Yeah.
are like tons of pictures and stuff. Like you really had to get a sense of the writing and capturing that. I think Michael Pollan's books were kind of like back then were like very helpful. Dan Barber's book at the time was
Hmm.
out, and that was kind of running there. A little more off the thing, but the One Straw Revolution was like a
Hmm.
book I was reading, and it was like a really cool approach to take it from like this super scientific, systematic way to grow food to letting nature kind of take control of your food. And it was really impactful for me. Various podcasts, but I think those were kind of the main books then. And then like chefs who have always embraced seasonality and cooking like whole foods and things were
Hmm.
really influential too.
So when you decided to make this shift, what was the reaction from some of your other sort of chef friends or hospitality industry friends? Did they think you were crazy, or did they think like, this guy sees the future and this is
I think anyone who kind of sees the future, not that I'm some psychic, right? Anyone who sees there's like another way, I think at first gets a little ridicule. I think a lot of my peers were like, what are you doing? Like,
Yeah.
that's interesting. Like you have a successful restaurant. We really like to come in and eat this duck dinner that you do, and you're gonna cook vegetables now? Like,
Yeah.
even my wife was like, what are you doing?
Yeah.
And I think, some people, made jokes like good luck with those vegetables and all that kind of thing. But over time, I think we proved what we were doing. We started building this restaurant right before COVID. And then I think with COVID and people being in lockdowns and kind of isolated, these conversations became bigger, actually. I think people were
Hmm.
a lot more interested in what they were eating, where it was coming from, because we saw breaks in food systems and all that kind of
Yeah.
stuff. So all of a sudden, people like, hey, maybe this guy is on to something, you know? I think that really helped do it. There's always going to be skeptics and people who don't, but I think that's great. And I've always appreciated the early subscribers to what we believed in and what we wanted to do with this restaurant. But yeah, it was an interesting time. Even finding investors to do the restaurant back then was wild. They'd be like, "What do you guys want to do?" We're like, "It's
Yeah.
like a sustainable restaurant. We're gonna cook vegetables. It's gonna be extremely seasonal. We're only buying local. We're not gonna have citrus on the menu. No, thank you." you know?
Yeah, because the restaurant, I mean, hospitality business is hard enough from what I've read. To put more guardrails on yourself might seem like a fool's errand to investors, no?
But now I'll run into them and they're like, "I'll tell you the biggest mistake."
One of the things that Ben Shuri mentioned when I was recording a podcast with him for this season is that, and we were talking about his signature sort of potato dish, potato cooked in the soil it was grown in, and talked about how when he first started serving that, people would be like, "Oh, where's the meat, mate? Like, what is?" I'm not going to try to do the Australian accent, but they were wondering there's something missing. This is only a potato and some garnish on a plate. Like, what is missing? And he's talked about how important it was for him to like sort of stick to his, I guess, convictions or values or beliefs, and then the market sort of had to catch up to where he was, and now quite successful and at least in culinary terms in achieving his vision. Do you feel like you had to sort of set out some convictions and have the market catch up, or do you think you had the timing a little bit more close to when it started to break?
No, I mean, I would agree with what Ben was saying. What a great guy too. But yeah, like we were set to do that menu when we opened, and like honestly, opening wasn't super strong. Like we're doing great now. We've gotten accolades and recognition for what we're
Mm-hmm.
doing. But at first it was people who were really in tune with what we were doing, like where they're environmentally sound or they were vegan or vegetarian would come. But the general public kind of stayed away, like you saying, like, where's the meat? What I'm not gonna be full, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And, those first couple months probably weren't the most profitable months for us. They didn't really look great on the books, but we stuck with what we believed in. We thought this was important. We wanted to support our local foodways. We wanted to build stronger food systems. We wanted to have that impact. We just bit the bullet and did it, and it worked out. The right people started coming in and hearing about
Yeah.
it, and it was really kind of word of mouth and like grassroots build up that reputation. And then the bigger publications came in because they heard these little murmurs, and then it kind of helped moved it. And like you said, like I was saying, and you just brought up too, I think the timing was really good. There was that big push for like vegan foods with all the impossible stuff and whatever, but I think that kind of created a opportunity for me to have a conversation with people who were curious about this. We were obviously
Mm-hmm.
doing something much different than those big brands were creating,
Yeah.
but it created an opportunity. So I think there's a little bit there, but sticking to your goal, I think is essential with anything, right? Like if there's got to be a little compromise here and there, but if you start to compromise too much, you lose the whole thing. And then I think no one's going to buy into it eventually because you lose the identity and the purpose of what you're trying to do.
Yeah, and you mentioned compromise there. I was reading an article. I think you guys worked with Runart Champagne, and you like bought a very expensive glass crusher. I think the article said it was like $10,000 or something like that, so that you could have these sort of products on the menu. Like when it comes to creativity in the kitchen, I think in that same CBS segment, it showed in your kitchen you have a sign that says "fuck around and find out." Like whether it's the glass crusher or trying to figure out how to do these compromises in a way that's still aligned with your goal. Where does creativity and sort of imagination play a role in trying to actually make, I guess, like a sustainable restaurant work?
Yeah, that's great. I think it's kind of one of the bigger things. And I don't, creativity and artistry, I think are like two different things, right? I think like there's craft, creativity, and then artistry kind of comes after that, right? But the creativity is like what drives us and what we have to do because in a lot of ways, there's very few people in restaurants that are doing things the way we are. And like the glass crusher thing, like Silo in London was a big influence for us. They were at the same time trying to work on how to do this too with the glass. I was really inspired by that. We had an opportunity with like Runar, like you said, they were working on their kind of sustainable pitch for their brand. Hey, do you want to help us fund this project a little bit? Can we go in on this? and we were able to do something. And the same thing for me is I was talking about compost bins the other day in a restaurant.
Hmm.
And there's like two ways to look at it. You could get a compost bin, and now that just becomes a replacement for a trash bin. You just keep filling it up, right? And then that goes out. But to us, the compost bin is like, how do we not fill it up? So it becomes this place we can look into and say, oh, well, that stem, like, that's still edible. Like, let's figure
Yeah.
out a creative way to do something with that. Like, we should be creating products with this, and we shouldn't be looking at it as waste, right? It's just an ingredient. We talked about this with our staff training the other day. Like we have a dish with some fennel on it, and they're like, "Oh, the fennel fronds, the fennel bulb, the fennel stem," and I'm like, "We would waste the stems," and I'm like, "Stop talking about it like that. It has the same value as a whole
Hmm.
product. It's just fennel, right? Like, we don't need to say like, oh, the trim from it. You know, it's not the trim. It's still the fennel. It's still the one thing. So there's always this force of creativity, especially going in the season we're in now, which we call our cellar larder season at the restaurants, the winter. It's basically just root vegetables, hardy greens, and then everything we pick fermented, dried from the summer through spring and into early fall for this year have to kind of bring that excitement to our dishes. So the team's always thinking like, okay, well, blueberries are awesome this year. How are we going to preserve some blueberries, bring that great flavor to this winter menu that's going to be pretty the farm list is going to shrink and shrink and shrink. So you're always that's the beauty of kind of looking at being a more sustainable or responsible restaurant is creativity is your friend. You know, it's like you're going to try things, you're going to fail. That's where the fuck around and find out comes from is like, will this work? I don't know. Give it a shot. If it doesn't, no big deal because it was gonna go in the trash anyway, right? And there's probably a little bit of light in that failure that we can build on and make something else and improve on.
Yeah.
So there's always a good lesson in the mistake.
Yeah. You mentioned Silo London and staff training. And when I lived in London, my first trip to Silo was like just mind blowing. And I think my favorite part of it was how educated the staff were. Like I had way too many questions. Hence why I have a podcast now to just actually ask the people creating things. But I was
Yeah.
asking the staff about everything, like how they made things, where things came from. Far more interested probably than most people that came even through Silo, given its reputation. So how do you think about sort of staff knowledge in that connection point? Because there's a balance, I think, between sort of being preachy or making people feel bad or like their choices aren't correct, but then also that's such a great opportunity if they just ate something delicious to be like, you know what, that thing came from a farm that was 7 miles down the road, or we actually fermented that, or we pickled that from something left over from 3 months ago or something like that. Like, how do you think about staff training in terms of educating the eater?
Yeah, I mean, you just nailed kind of the way we do it there is, we try to keep that original spiel, that description of the dish kind of minimal and keep it personal. Like, what's the three components you're really excited about that are on that plate? Let the guests kind of discover what they're eating on that course. And then while you're clearing that plate is the time for that conversation. Like, oh, like
Hmm.
you said, this potato was amazing. And then you're like, oh, well, actually, that's our friends from Fireside Farm. They grew this delicious potato this year. And like, you should they're amazing. They're only 30 miles away. Go visit them sometime. They sell at the farmer's market. Like that's when those windows open. But we want to make sure our team has all that information, that they understand what we're doing. We really hire slow at the restaurant because we want to get folks in that believe in kind of what we do, or there's even like a little interest in that they actually care about what we're doing, right? Because otherwise it's just a paycheck and they're not going to really feel it when they're trying to describe to a guest these amazing things that we're doing. So we don't want to be too preachy. Like I think that's a turnoff, right? And that's where we would fail as a restaurant and try to hide little things in
Hmm.
there. Like at the end of our meal, we present the menu. We don't present it at the beginning. We give it at the end. And the menu is made from recycled paper that's embedded with wildflower seeds. Tell them, make sure you know what region you're in because you don't want to make it we shoot ourselves in the foot there. But the idea is like this is a menu. People collect menus, but also just like don't throw it in the trash, rip it up. You can throw it in your backyard, throw it along the highway, whatever, and that will promote, wildflowers, pollinators, all those beautiful things. So it's a fun little way to give a send off and kind of like nail our mission at the end. And we didn't have to kind of do it like from the start. So I think it's like easing into it and read each guest differently. Some people don't care. They're just there because they heard we had a Michelin star and
Yeah.
that's what they eat at. And then some people really care about what we do, and I'm, thankful for whoever comes in the door. Yeah.
Yeah. One thing that I think strikes me, especially talking about that menu, sort of the intentionality. Every chef that is sort of trying to do things more sustainability, I'm always struck by the intentionality. They think about every single touch point. What's the hardest thing to actually put in place with that intentionality about creating a sustainable restaurant? Like, is it supply chain? Is it like the glass sort of thing of like trying to figure out how to reduce waste? Is it something about the menu? With all that intentionality you have, what has been really hard for you to get right, or at least get right to your standard?
I think it's still packaging. Like some of the farms we work with are fantastic. Like what they're doing there, just the biodiversity, the care for the soil, the care for the plants, care for their staff is just incredible. But they'll still deliver something in a box. And if it's a loose green, it might have a plastic bag and trying to convince them not to do it. But I know they're putting every effort into making their farm, like the quality of the product great and doing things like that. So it's figuring out ways to get around that is really hard. A lot of our farms are closed loop systems. They come in with a crate. We take the product out of the crate, put it into our container. Then they take their crate back. And it's just a really great cycle and convincing people to get on board with that. I'd say another hard thing for us is like not to get set on our laurels, like we make these plates out of glassware. Like that's cool. We could just run with that and sound like we're awesome. But to keep pushing and seeing what we can do with this restaurant. Like when we started Oyster Oyster, we didn't even call it like a concept or a restaurant. We called it a project, a dining project, because to us it was to figure out what could we do. And the overzealous thing, to bring that back up again, is like we're excited. We want to see what we can possibly do. We do not expect every restaurant to try to do everything we do and do it exactly the way we do it. But if we inspire someone to do, one or the two things that we do, I mean, that makes change, right? And that's what we want to do. And want to keep finding better ways and talk to our peers and be inspired by other folks and not think we're in our own bubble. Cause sometimes it does feel like we're, alone in this mission, especially in DC, but more restaurants are taking on to this and our peers are asking questions and we're contributing to that. I think that's the hard part. And it's like when you're mission based, it's like, how do you stay relevant, but you're also trying to create interesting food and the way the food media works. And it's just like this messy thing. But I would say it's like packaging and kind of just keep pushing is like the hard part.
Yeah. So on that being a project and keeping pushing, you mentioned you guys, Oyster Oyster has a Michelin star and a Michelin Green Star. So when we think about this journey of building Oyster Oyster, it being a project, it's something that is sort of evolving over time. Like do you read and find out about like all this new practice and then you try to bring it into the kitchen? Is that part of that evolution? Are there other things that you're sort of pulling from to try to, I guess, stay on top of your game? Like, because I always compare it to a lot of Michelin star restaurants. The chef will have like a signature dish. And it'll be that dish will have been on the restaurant menu for 20 years. It's why people come there and it hasn't changed. And I guess that's interesting for some people to eat, but there's also probably something to say like this restaurant has evolved and changed and it's kind of different every single time that I go. Like, how do you keep up with that? Like, how do you bring in the new to make sure the project keeps evolving?
Yeah, I think that's kind of what eating at our restaurant's about is day to day. The menu can change in these small ways, and I think that's what's exciting. Like we won't have a signature dish because that product's only available for 2 to 3 months, and it has to move on. So that's one thing that we're always staying creative. We have to stay very flexible, where a restaurant, like you mentioned, is very rigid. Like this is the dish we're doing, right? Like it's not going to change. It might improve. We might be more efficient in it. But for us, it's like sometimes we don't even know when a product's going to end. Like a farmer would be like, oh, we got the first frost. It's done. We have
Yeah.
to we have to quickly change. So, in our restaurant, like the accolades are great. They bring folks in. But when I opened Oyster, I never imagined we'd be like a Michelin rated restaurant. I didn't think they would pay attention because the Green Star wasn't a thing yet. I didn't know if, I knew the cooking was good. I knew I had a good like experience, but I don't know if that was really on their radar, and it was. So for me, it's kind of cool because there's so many restaurants that are the complete opposite of us that have that
Yeah.
accolade, and then we're in there. But yeah, I think it's just we don't have a choice, I guess, is what the answer really is. We don't have a choice to if we can stay pushing or not to achieve that, because nature's always changing and we have to keep rolling with the punches with that. So it just keeps us very very loose, very fluid, and open minded.
Yeah. And I don't want to get you in trouble or be too controversial, but there's been a recent trend sort of restaurants that either went plant-based or vegetarian or primarily sort of seasonal vegetables adding meat back onto the menu, citing it sort of as a requirement for business these days. Like they say they have to. There's obviously one very famous example in New York City of a restaurant that made a really big deal about going exclusively plant-based and then adding meat back. What is your thought process around that? Like, have there been moments where you thought like, oh, it makes sense to add this meat to the menu? Like, it makes sense to add this. I know some restaurants like Silo do invasive species, and which really is interesting from an environmental conversation. Is it something you're just going to stick to your guns on and go down with the ship, or you're open to it if the situation is right or the ingredients right?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I think they are businesses at the end of the day, and you have to, there's different types of overhead for everything. I don't believe that everyone should just eat vegetables or plants. Like that's your only way. I mean, like geographically, that's not possible for some people, right? And we know that the whole world's not just going to switch like that. So if you could even get folks in to eat 90% of their meals plants, and then they have their little piece of fish or steak, and that is creating change, I think that's great. I think for oyster, it's always been about that agriculture in our region in the mid-Atlantic and kind of highlighting that. So I feel that's our approach, and that's what we're going to stick with. I can't say every restaurant I do beyond this is going to be exactly that, but it will
Mm-hmm.
always be sustainable. Like the invasive species thing, like there's a reason behind why you're doing something, and it connects dots and makes sense. I think there's a different approach, and some folks, they have a lot of people to employ that they're responsible for those folks too, and that's a part of sustainability too, is
Yeah.
keeping everyone afloat there. So I think if you're making smart decisions and what you're buying product wise is sound and it's being produced well, like if you put beef on the menu, it's regenerative and it's a small farm and everything's being done well and there's great biodiversity, then good for you, right? But if you're just buying commodity stuff and just trying to supplement, then I think that's a fail. So
Yeah, that makes sense. So, sort of bring our recording to a close. I have just a few sort of quick fire questions for you that are a little bit more fun, a little bit more specific. So, first one, what is your favorite vegetable to cook with?
kohlrabi. I love kohlrabi. I think it's great, raw, cooked, everything. So yeah.
Awesome. What season of vegetables or cellar larder season, what season of vegetables gets you most excited to get in the kitchen?
That right when fall meets summer, like that little transition period, I think is so exciting. You have like corn and winter squash and hardy herbs and tomatoes are still happening. I think it's just such really good crossover of like the full bounty of what a farm can be. And it's so fun to cook with.
What is the most criminally underrated vegetable?
Ooh, this is a hard one. I'd say 15 years ago, I could probably name a bunch, but I feel like now you see everybody raging about cabbage. Like cabbage is so amazing, where that was like a pretty humble thing in the past. I think
Yeah,
we're kind of getting over the underrated. That's a hard one. Maybe beets still get a pretty bad rap, you know?
yeah.
Like you see the beet and goat cheese salad everywhere, but beyond that, it's kind of underrated, maybe. Yeah.
Awesome. And so, other than your own restaurant, other than Oyster Oyster, sort of favorite dish that you've had that either featured a vegetable or some other sort of sustainable forward ingredient?
Dang, you're gonna make me lose a lot of friends picking a face. Wow, that's really good. Okay, I was in Copenhagen for the MAD Symposium this past spring, and I went to a restaurant called Jatak with the chef Jonathan Tam. On his menu, he had like a char siu, like pork thing going on, and obviously I don't eat. So they had one of his chefs had recently forged like this beautiful chicken of the woods mushroom, and they did it in the preparation
Nice.
of char siu, and it was really amazing. It was like this whole spread of like different condiments and stuff. It was really cool and it was very creative. So I enjoyed that very much.
Awesome. Fantastic. Sounds delicious. Thank you so much, Rob, for joining us on Ecosystem Member today. I think our listeners will really enjoy this conversation.
Cool. Thank you for having me.